"Daddy, are we rich now?" Jacob asked as he clutched a worn-out toy truck in one hand and his father's calloused fingers in the other. Dean Dorsey crouched beside the old pickup truck, wiping sweat from his brow as he looked at his 7-year-old son. "Not yet, buddy, but I got us a job today." "A good one." The mansion in front of them looked like something out of a movie. White stone walls, huge glass windows, and a marble fountain in the middle of a long, circular driveway. Dean had repaired a lot of pools in his life, but never one that came with a gate intercom and a butler at the door. He adjusted the straps on his tool bag, gave Jacob a reassuring nod, and walked toward the front. "Name?" the butler asked. "Dean Dorsey. Dorsey Pool and Repair." The butler scanned a clipboard and then stepped aside. "Right this way, Miss Bellamy is expecting you, Miss Bellamy." Dean repeated the name in his mind. Sounded fancy. He followed the butler through a grand hallway with tall ceilings and gleaming floors. Jacob's eyes went wide as he looked up at the chandelier. They stepped out onto a massive backyard that looked like a resort. The pool was Olympic-sized, but the water was murky and green. Dean was already making a mental list of everything wrong when he heard a voice behind him. "I hope the smell didn't scare you off." He turned and froze. A woman stood at the edge of the patio, sunglasses perched on her head, her long auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She wore jeans and a simple white tee, but somehow looked like she belonged on a magazine cover. "I'm Lena Bellamy," she said, stepping closer and offering her hand. "Sorry, the pool's a disaster. The last guy bailed halfway through." Dean shook her hand, surprised by her firm grip. "Dean Dorsey, and this is my son, Jacob." Lena glanced down at Jacob and smiled. "Nice to meet you, Jacob. That's a cool truck you've got." Jacob beamed. "It's a fire truck. It used to have a ladder, but it broke." "Well," Lena said, crouching to his level, "maybe we can find something cool for you to play with while your dad works." Dean cleared his throat. "I'll keep him close. Won't be any trouble." Lena stood and looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "He's welcome to stay. I've got a shaded cabana and a few toys in the pool house for my nephews. He'll be safe." Dean hesitated. He didn't like letting Jacob out of sight, but something about her felt honest. "All right," he said, "but I still want to keep him nearby." Lena smiled. "Of course." As Dean got to work draining the pool and assessing the broken filter system, Jacob sat in the shade with a juice box and a plastic dinosaur Lena had dug up from somewhere. She stayed nearby, occasionally asking questions about the process. "You always work alone?" she asked, leaning against the railing as Dean fiddled with the pump. "Can't afford a crew," he said simply. "It's just me and Jacob after school." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's a lot to handle," Dean shrugged. "We manage." She watched him another beat before walking off to take a phone call. Probably something high-end and important, he figured. She had the air of someone with money, but she didn't flaunt it. No designer logos, no attitude, just real. Over the next few days, Dean returned to the mansion. Jacob came with him each time, and Lena was always there offering him snacks, chatting with Dean between tasks, asking him about his life. She never mentioned what she did or how she could afford this place, but Dean didn't push. One afternoon, as Dean was replacing a cracked tile by the pool's edge, Lena sat beside him, her bare feet in the shallow water. "You ever take a break?" she asked. He glanced up. "Breaks don't pay the bills." Lena tilted her head. "You don't even know what I'm paying you yet. I assume it'll be fair." She didn't answer that, just smiled. Then her eyes drifted to Jacob, who was organizing a pile of rocks by color. "He's a sweet kid." Dean nodded. "Smart, too." His mom, Dean's hands paused a moment before resuming. "She left when he was 3, said she didn't sign up for ramen dinners and secondhand shoes." Lena's expression softened. "That's rough." Dean didn't say anything. He didn't like talking about it, but something about Lena made it easier. "Why'd you buy this place?" he asked, changing the subject. She looked out over the pool. "Honestly, I needed something to fix, something that wasn't me." Dean looked at her, his hands still. For the first time, she looked unsure. "You don't seem broken," he said. She laughed quietly. "That's the point of good makeup." "And a big house." That night, after Dean finished the last of the tile work and packed up his tools, Lena walked him and Jacob to the gate. "You know," she said, "I've got a dinner party next week. Just a few people. You should come, both of you." Dean blinked. "You want me to?" "Come to a party. It's casual," she said. Jacob can hang with the caterer's daughter, and I'd like to see you in something that doesn't stain your hands." Dean hesitated. He didn't own anything fancy, he didn't go to parties, but the way she was looking at him made it hard to say no. "I'll think about it," he said finally. She smiled. "Do more than think." As they drove away, Jacob looked up from the back seat. "Daddy." "Yeah, bud. Are we rich now?" Dean laughed under his breath. "Not yet, kiddo." But something about the way Lena had looked at him really made him feel like maybe, just maybe, life was about to change. Dean adjusted the collar of his only clean button-down shirt, standing in front of the bathroom mirror in the small rental home he and Jacob shared. It was the same shirt he'd worn to his cousin's wedding 5 years ago, and it fit a little tighter now. Behind him, Jacob was swinging his legs at the edge of the tub, dressed in the navy polo Dean had picked up from the thrift store earlier that day. "Do rich people eat spaghetti?" Jacob asked, watching his reflection intently as he smoothed his hair down with both hands. Dean chuckled. "Probably not the kind we make." Outside, the sun was dipping low enough to cast long shadows through the blinds. Dean grabbed his keys from the hook, checked that he had Jacob's inhaler in his pocket, and opened the door. The drive to Lena's place was quiet, both of them watching the city blur into tree-lined hills. Dean's stomach tightened the closer they got. He didn't belong in a house like that. He could fix pipes and patch concrete blindfolded, but small talk over wine glasses and hors d'oeuvres, that was foreign territory. At the gate, a valet waved him forward. Dean hesitated, then pulled into the circular driveway and stepped out. A young woman in a black dress appeared beside the passenger door and opened it for Jacob, who clutched Dean's hand tightly the moment his feet hit the ground. "Welcome, Mr. Dorsey," she said with a kind smile. "You're on the guest list." "Head through the garden doors, Miss Bellamy is inside." The entrance was lit with soft gold uplighting that made the entire front of the house glow. Music drifted from inside, jazzy and low, the kind of background noise that made people linger with champagne. Dean bent down, whispering, "Remember, if you feel sick or you can't find me, just ask for help, all right." Jacob nodded solemnly. Inside, the living room had been transformed. The furniture had been rearranged to make space for tall cocktail tables and clusters of guests in tailored suits and silk dresses. A string quartet played in the corner by the fireplace. Dean scanned the room, quickly zeroing in on a familiar coppery ponytail near the bar. Lena wore a navy blue jumpsuit with a plunging neckline and silver earrings that caught the light. When she saw Dean, her expression lit up genuine, warm, and completely unpretentious. "You clean up well," she said, stepping toward him with a glass of something sparkling in her hand. Dean rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. "I hope that's a compliment. It's a fact." Her eyes flicked down to Jacob. "And you, sir, look like a young gentleman." Jacob puffed up slightly. "My dad said I can have one soda." "Just one?" "Then we'll make it count," Lena said, signaling toward the kitchen. A woman in a white chef's coat appeared almost instantly and led Jacob away toward the back patio where a few other kids were playing with oversized foam blocks under fairy lights. Dean watched him go, tension still in his shoulders. "They're supervised," Lena said gently. "The chef's niece is out there too, they'll be fine." He nodded, still unsure what to do with his hands. "Come on," she said, taking his arm. "Let me introduce you to some people." The night passed in a blur of introductions and conversations Dean struggled to keep up with. City planners, gallery owners, a guy who apparently owned 5 car dealerships. Everyone smiled politely when Lena introduced him, but Dean could feel the subtle shift in posture when she mentioned he repaired her pool. No one said anything rude, but he caught the glances. He was halfway through a glass of ginger ale when he overheard one man whisper to another, charming in a salt-of-the-earth kind of way, definitely not her usual type. Dean stepped away and found himself by the open terrace doors, letting the cool air hit his face. A moment later, Lena appeared beside him. "Overwhelmed? Little bit," he said honestly. "They mean well," she said, her tone softer now, "but they're used to a different kind of world." Dean looked at her. "And which one are you used to?" She leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed. "I grew up riding buses with holes in the floor. My mom worked nights at a diner. This," she said, gesturing toward the house, "came later, after a lot of correcting mistakes." He He studied her face. You don't talk like someone who's proud of it. I'm proud of the work, she said. Not the price. Before he could ask what she meant, a man interrupted them. Tall, polished, and carrying a half-empty glass of scotch, he walked right up to Lena with the ease of someone who didn't wait for permission. Lena, I figured I'd find you out here. Thought you were avoiding me, she stiffened, her smile tight. Greg, this isn't the time. Greg turned to Dean, sizing him up like a used car. And who's this? The new project? Dean straightened, instinctively protective. Lena stepped between them. Greg, go inside. No need to get defensive, Greg said, smirking. It's just interesting, that's all. Dean didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His jaw was set and his eyes didn't move from Greg's face. Lena's voice was low but firm. Leave. Greg finally turned, muttering something under his breath as he walked away. Dean exhaled slowly. Friend of yours, X, she said. He doesn't like being reminded that I moved on without him. Dean nodded. He talked to everyone like that, only the ones who make him feel small. They stood in silence for a moment, the music distant behind them. I'm sorry, Lena said. I didn't think he'd show. I've met worse, Dean replied. But thanks for stepping in. She looked up at him, the lights from inside casting a soft glow on her cheekbones. You didn't flinch, you didn't apologize for being here, Dean shrugged. Why should I? You invited me. That made her laugh quiet, genuine. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. You don't pretend to be anything you're not. That's rare around here. He met her gaze. You don't pretend either. I used to, she admitted. Now I just try to keep my feet on the ground. Dean glanced toward the backyard. I should check on Jacob. Lena nodded. Of course. They walked together toward the patio. Through the glass doors, Dean spotted Jacob laughing with another kid holding a cup of blue punch. He looks happy, Lena said. Yeah, Dean replied. He is. She turned to him. Come back tomorrow, just you. Dean raised an eyebrow. I need your help with something, she said. Something unrelated to the pool. He hesitated. What kind of help? You'll see. Dean searched her face for a hint of mischief or manipulation, but there was only sincerity and a flicker of vulnerability she didn't try to hide. All right, he said finally. Tomorrow. She smiled, then reached for his hand, gave it a gentle squeeze, and let it go. Dean stood there long after she'd turned away, wondering what on earth he'd just agreed to and why his chest felt like it was trying to learn a new rhythm. Dean stood at the edge of the marble foyer, hands rough from years of labor clutching the strap of his tool bag, though he hadn't been asked to bring it. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting soft shadows across the polished floor. Somewhere deeper in the house, faint movement echoed heels on stone, deliberate and unhurried. Then Lena appeared at the top of the staircase, dressed in a crisp blouse tucked into high-waisted trousers, her expression unreadable but focused. She didn't greet him with the teasing warmth she usually wore like a second skin. Today, she looked like someone with something to lose. Come with me, she said, turning without waiting for an answer. Dean followed her through a hallway he hadn't seen before, past artwork and shelves lined with antique books. They stepped into a room that looked nothing like the rest of the house, no designer furniture, no curated ambience. Just a mahogany desk buried under papers, an old corkboard pinned with faded photographs, and a stack of manila folders that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Lena shut the door behind them and leaned against it. I need someone I can trust, she said, voice low. Dean raised an eyebrow. What kind of trust are we talking about? She walked to the desk and picked up a folder, flipping it open. There's a real estate firm trying to buy up my neighborhood back in Ridgeview. My mother's house is still there, and so are the last 6 families who haven't been pushed out by redevelopment. They're using intimidation, now code violations, surprise inspections, even threats. Dean crossed his arms. And this involves me how? She looked at him then, really looked. You grew up doing repairs. You know how to deal with city inspectors. You know how to make broken things look like they were never touched. He frowned. You want me to fake renovations? No, she said quickly. I want you to do real work that buys us time. If the houses meet code, they can't fine them. If they can't fine them, they can't evict anyone. Dean took the folder she extended and flipped through the document's photos of cracked steps, outdated wiring, broken siding. You could hire a whole team, he said without looking up. I don't want a team, she said. I want someone who gives a damn. He closed the folder. And you think that's me? She stepped closer. I know it is. For a long moment neither spoke, then Dean exhaled slowly. If I do this, I can't leave Jacob alone. He stays with me. Of course, she said. There's a community center nearby. I can arrange something, or I'll watch him myself if I'm around. Dean nodded once. Then I'll look at the houses. The tension in her shoulders eased. Thank you. He paused at the door. Why are you really doing this? She hesitated. Because I promised my mother I wouldn't let them erase where we came from. Dean didn't ask anything else. He just walked out, folder under his arm. The next day, he pulled up to Ridgeview with Jacob in the passenger seat, eating a banana while staring out the window. The neighborhood was a patchwork of sun-faded houses and uneven sidewalks. A group of kids played basketball with a hoop bolted to a telephone pole. An old woman swept her porch, pausing to wave as they passed. Dean parked in front of a narrow gray house with chipped paint and a sagging porch. A hand-painted sign in the window read, "This is home." He was halfway up the walkway when the door opened and a man in his 60s stepped out. He had a limp and wore a mechanic's shirt with a name patch that read LEO. "You're the one Lena sent?" the man asked, eyeing Dean. "Name's Dean," he said, gripping the older man's hand firmly. "She told me you've got a few things that need fixing." Leo snorted. "That's one way to put it. Water heaters shot, bathroom floors soft, and the porch might collapse if you sneeze too hard." Dean glanced back at Jacob. "You okay for a bit?" Jacob nodded, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "I brought my dinosaurs." Leo led Dean inside. The floor groaned with every step and the air smelled faintly of mildew, but it was clean, lived in. Real. Dean spent the next 2 hours crawling under the house, checking joists, measuring window frames, and jotting down supply lists. Leo watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "She told me you're a single dad," the older man said after a while. Dean didn't look up. "That a problem?" "No." "That's a reason." He stood. "A reason for what? For why you're here. Only people who have been kicked around know how to hold a door open for someone else." By the end of the day, Dean had a full list and a few bruises. He drove back to the mansion as sunset painted the sky orange. Lena was waiting near the back patio, a laptop open in front of her and a pair of reading glasses sliding down her nose. "You look like someone dropped a house on you," she said. He pulled out the list. "I'll need materials, tools. Maybe a second set of hands for the electrical." She took the paper without hesitation. "I'll get it covered." Dean hesitated. "This isn't charity." Lena looked up, her eyes steady. "No, this is war." Over the next week, Dean returned to Ridgeview every day. He tackled one house at a time, replacing rotted beams, fixing plumbing, patching roofs. Word spread quickly, and soon neighbors came by offering lemonade, extra nails, or just thanks. One afternoon, as Dean rewired a faulty fuse box, he caught Jacob sitting beside a girl with braids and thick glasses, showing her how to line up action figures like soldiers. For the first time in a long time, something settled in his chest, a quiet, unexpected peace. On Friday evening, Lena showed up in jeans and boots, her hair pulled back tight. She didn't stand around giving orders. She grabbed a paintbrush and helped repaint a sagging fence. "You've done more in 5 days than city grants did in 5 years, she said, brushing white paint along the slats. Dean wiped sweat from his neck. "That's because I'm not trying to impress a board." She glanced at him. "Who are you trying to impress?" He didn't answer, not with words, but the way he looked at her steady, unflinching said enough. The moment stretched, thick with something neither of them had dared name yet. Then Lena looked down, brushing a smudge of paint off her wrist. "There's a council meeting next week. I want you to come with me. Tell them what you've seen, what you've done." Dean considered that. "I'm not the speech kind." "You don't have to be," she said. "You just have to be honest." That he could do. As they finished the last of the fence, dusk settled over Ridgeview and porch lights winked on one by one. Jacob ran up to Dean, arms outstretched. "Daddy, I helped carry wood." Dean scooped him up. "You're getting stronger." Lena smiled at them, something soft in her expression. "You've got a good kid." Dean looked at her, the words catching in his throat. "I know," he said finally. "And I think he's starting to believe in good people again." Lena didn't answer, but the way she reached out, just lightly brushing her fingers against his wrist, said everything. The city council meeting took place in a sandstone municipal building off Main Street, tucked between a shuttered bank and a bakery that still smelled like cinnamon after dark. The courtroom-style chamber was filled to the brim, every folding chair taken, every wall lined with murmuring residents, many from Ridgeview, dressed in their Sunday best even though it was Thursday. Lena sat beside Dean at the front, her posture composed but her jaw tight. Jacob sat quietly in the third row behind them, flanked by a retired schoolteacher Lena had arranged to watch him for the evening. He held a sketch pad and a fistful of crayons, but his eyes kept drifting toward his father. One of the council members, a man with deep creases across his forehead and a tie too tight for his collar, leaned into the microphone and cleared his throat. Next item on the agenda, public commentary on proposed redevelopment of Zone 22. Miss Bellamy, you've requested time. Lena stood, heels clicking softly as she approached the podium, her voice clear and calm carried through the chamber. Ridgeview isn't empty and it's not forgotten, it's a community. And for the last month, I've watched it fight to stay alive. I've seen roofs patched, wiring replaced, and porches rebuilt, all without a dime from the city. Not because people there are wealthy, but because they believe their homes are worth preserving. She stepped aside. Dean Dorsey can tell you the rest. Dean hadn't planned to speak, not really. But when she looked at him, there was no pressure in her gaze, just the same quiet faith he'd seen when she handed him that first folder. He stood slowly, walked to the podium, and adjusted the microphone with fingers still nicked from roofing nails. I'm not a politician, he began. I'm a contractor. I fix things. When I started working in Ridgeview, I figured I'd be patching up a few busted pipes and moving on, but what I found was a neighborhood that still had life in it, people who wanted to stay. Families who just needed a little help to pass inspections, not a wrecking ball. He paused, the quiet in the room stretching. You can redraw maps and sell lots, but you can't buy what makes a place home. That has to be protected. When he sat down, Lena's fingers found his under the table. She didn't squeeze them. She didn't need to. The council deliberated for 20 minutes behind closed doors, during which time Jacob fell asleep with his head on the retired teacher's arm. Then the doors opened and the decision was read aloud. The motion to initiate redevelopment on Zone 22 was denied. A collective breath escaped the room like a balloon unknotted at once. Cheers followed, and someone shouted Lena's name. She waved it off, but her eyes glistened as she looked at Dean. Later that night, back at Lena's mansion, the mood was quieter. Jacob had been tucked into the guest room, fast asleep beneath a blanket printed with planets Lena had ordered just in case he stayed over again. Dean stood in the kitchen, leaning against the marble island as Lena handed him a glass of water. I knew you'd be good in front of them, she said. I was sweating through my shirt. You didn't show it. He took a sip. You always believe in people this fast? No, she said. Just you. They stood there, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound until she stepped closer. I don't want this to be temporary, she said. Not the repairs, not the work, not you. Dean looked down at the floor, then back at her. You're a millionaire, Lena. You've got this whole world. I didn't fall for a world, she interrupted. I fell for a man who rebuilt more than houses. He didn't answer, not right away. He reached for her hand instead, and they stood in silence for a long moment, fingers laced. You sure? He finally asked. She nodded. Completely. The next morning, Dean woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of Jacob's laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. He followed the sound to the kitchen, where Jacob sat at the counter, wearing one of Lena's aprons that dragged past his knees. Lena flipped pancakes at the stove, her hair still damp from a shower. I'm making space pancakes, Jacob announced. They have stars in them, Dean grinned. That's so? Lena glanced over her shoulder. He's the creative director. I'm just the labor. Dean walked over, slid his arms around her waist from behind, and kissed her shoulder. She leaned into him without hesitation. Later that week, Lena surprised Dean with a visit to Ridgeview, this time not to fix anything, but to unveil something new. They stood together in front of the old library, which had been shuttered for years. A bright blue banner stretched across the entrance, Ridgeview Resource Center, opening soon. I bought it last year, she said. Didn't know what for at the time, now I do. Dean stared at the sign. You're serious? You'll run the vocational side, she said. Teach wiring, plumbing, real trades. Jacob can run around with the kids in the rec center wing. Dean turned toward her. You think people'll come? I think they'll trust someone who showed up when no one else did. He watched as she walked up the steps and unlocked the doors for the first time, then followed her inside. That spring, Dean moved into the mansion not because he needed a roof, but because he chose love over pride. Lena made no grand announcement, and there was no diamond-studded spectacle. Instead, she handed him a key over coffee one morning, and he accepted it with a kiss and a whispered thank you into her neck. When summer hit, the pool was finally clear again. Jacob dove in with a cannonball, and Dean followed, splashing after him while Lena watched from a lounge chair. Later, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Dean pulled Lena into the shallow end, water up to their waists, and looked at her like the world had finally made sense. You fixed my pool, she said, teasing. He brushed her wet hair back behind her ear. You fixed everything else. They kissed as the water shimmered around them, laughter echoing from the patio, and for the first time in a long time, Dean Dorsey didn't feel like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. He felt home, loved, and exactly where he was meant to be. The bell above the Ridgeview Community Center's front door chimed as Dean stepped out onto the sidewalk, wiping drywall dust from his palms. Across the street, an elderly man was waving a paint roller like a baton, directing two teens as they added a mural to the side of the hardware store. The neighborhood had changed, not polished, not perfect, but alive in ways it hadn't been in years. Lena stood beside a folding table under a pop-up tent, sorting through a stack of grant applications with two women from the city's outreach program. She looked up when she saw Dean and lifted a clipboard in silent triumph. That's the last signature we needed, she said as he reached her side. Dean took the clipboard with both hands, scanning the page. So it's official. The center's going permanent. And fully funded, she said, her voice calmer than he'd ever heard it. He looked at her as the late afternoon light slipped through the leaves overhead. You did it. We did it, she corrected. You built half of it by hand. Dean set the clipboard down and leaned against the edge of the table. You know, I used to think stability was a myth, something for other people, people with safety nets. Lena turned to face him. And now, he looked over at the center, where Jacob was organizing art supplies with two other kids, his face flushed with focus. Now I think maybe I just hadn't met the right kind of chaos. Lena laughed, a genuine, unfiltered sound that drew a few glances from across the street. Speaking of chaos, she said, stepping closer, I've been thinking about something. Dean raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? She tilted her head. Probably, but only a little. He waited. I bought a second property. It's an old Craftsman on the edge of Ridgeview. Needs work, but it's got a yard Jacob would love. Big kitchen, light in every room, and it's closer to the center. Dean's brow furrowed. You're moving out of the mansion. I'm not a mansion person, she said. I loved it when I needed to prove I could have it, but now I want something that feels lived in, shared, real. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. You want me to come with you? I want you to build it with me, she said. Not just the house, all of it. Dean didn't answer right away. He took her hand, ran his thumb along the line between her fingers. You sure? I've never been more certain of anything. That night, while Jacob slept in the guest room at Lena's and the city outside finally quieted, they lay together on the couch, legs tangled, the distant hum of a dishwasher murmuring in the background. Lena rested her head on Dean's shoulder, tracing invisible shapes on his chest. I never told you what I used to be afraid of, she said. Dean looked down at her. What? Being needed, she said simply. Because it always came with expectations, conditions, but with you, it feels different. Like being needed and being chosen are the same. Dean kissed her temple. You're not just needed, you're home. She turned her face to his, eyes soft and unwavering. Then let's build one. They closed on the Ridgeview property a month later. The house was a crooked-limbed beauty with peeling paint and a wild garden overtaking the back fence. It didn't matter. They saw what it could be. Dean started with the foundation. Lena stripped wallpaper. Jacob declared the attic his future spaceship lab. On the fourth morning, Dean rolled out of bed and found Lena in the kitchen, barefoot and wearing one of his flannel shirts. She was pouring pancake batter into a pan, humming under her breath. He walked up behind her, slid his arms around her waist, and kissed her cheek. "I ever tell you how you make mornings bearable?" She leaned back into him. "You tell me with the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention." He grinned. "I don't think I've looked away since you opened that gate." A week later, they hosted their first dinner party in the new house. It wasn't a gala. There were no string quartets. Just folding chairs in the backyard, paper lanterns strung between trees, and a table piled with homemade food. The air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Leo brought a peach cobbler. The girl with the braids Jacob had befriended brought a painted rock with their house number scrawled across it in glitter glue. Lena stood beside Dean near the grill as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. She wore a sundress with grass stains on the hem and her hair twisted up in a clip. Dean handed her a plate and leaned in. "Tell me this isn't better than champagne and chandeliers." She bumped his shoulder lightly. "This is everything I never knew I wanted." He nodded toward the picnic table, where Jacob was animatedly telling a story to 3 younger kids. "He's thriving. He's safe," Lena added, and happy. Dean turned to her, voice quiet. "So are we." 2 months passed and the house transformed. Not just in structure, but in soul. The walls echoed with music, argument, laughter. They hosted neighborhood movie nights. Dean taught wiring workshops in the garage. Lena ran her nonprofit from the sunroom. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled over the rooftops and wind rattled the shutters, Dean knelt on the living room floor, a small velvet box in his hand. Jacob was asleep upstairs. Lena had just come in from locking the shed. She froze when she saw him. "I don't have a speech," he said. "Just a question." She stepped forward slowly, eyes wide, lips parted. "I've spent my whole life fixing things," he said. "And then you walked in and didn't need fixing. You just needed someone to stand beside you. Let me keep doing that." For the rest of it, Lena dropped to her knees in front of him, rain dripping from her hair. Yes, he opened the box. The ring wasn't flashy, it wasn't from a designer, but it was hers and it fit perfectly. They married in the backyard the following spring. Under an arch of wildflowers Lena and Jacob had arranged themselves. The guests were neighbors, friends, and the city official who'd signed the final grant for the community center. There were no cameras, no headlines. Just vows whispered under open sky and a kiss that promised permanence. That night, after the last lantern burned out and the dishes were stacked in the sink, Dean carried Lena across the threshold of the house they'd rebuilt from the ground up. She laughed against his chest, giddy and breathless. In the quiet that followed, with the windows open and the scent of lilacs drifting in, they curled into each other in the bed they'd assembled with their own hands. Lena whispered into the dark, "What does forever look like to you?" Dean didn't hesitate. "This," he said. "Exactly this."